It's done, yeah. So we finally can meet.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. This conversation has been pending for a long time. It's been extended now.
Yeah, I've been on the road. I mean, yeah, we had this. Yeah, I think the time we were never able to discuss in a synchronized way somehow, right? So yeah, so let's discuss what are the open points, or what are the, let's say, the challenge or the issues that you see.
So if I may, and also the the link of the presentation which you shared earlier, if you remember, is a
Yes.
small presentation which you made,
Yeah.
So I can share the screen, just go through everything quickly. So okay, so the thing is, with the idea, me and Joseph, we proposed this whole configuration, this configuration PR was with the idea that that we're gonna have a RAN configuration, a common configuration, and then NF specific configuration, AMF, SMF, or whatever. But then again, because you didn't really like this idea, right, to have AMF, SMF, and all NF specific configuration, because later on in an NF, if anything changes, then we have to do versioning, and then we have to do the changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, but then we tried to break down into smaller CRs. Let's say we made one CR now for PLMN, one for soft GUMI, for AMF, and in the future they're going to be more and more. But what we took right now, it's really basic. There has to be no versioning, because in every 3GPP release this always remains, right? It's been there from, I would say, 3G, 4G. It's been even before. I mean, in 5G they changed the name to AMF now, let's say. So okay, we don't have to do that. But now this, so the new common, this the seller config which asked me to add this, especially the raw one, the raw one which you asked me to add with config refs, how different it will be from the config ref which already exists, which is created by using dependencies here,
So they are two different purposes, right? One is basically taking in a configuration from another element. And this is basically defining the config of a specific element, right? So that's the difference between the two. But in terms of semantics, they are the same, but in terms of purpose, they are different. So in other words, if you get a config ref, it's basically the configuration of another network function, whereas this one is basically the configuration for this network function. So I think we have to distinguish those two.
Okay, so, and you don't want to just reutilize the configures. You want to have something similar, but different kind, right? To have a clear
I think it's
distinction.
never a good, from the moment you multi-purpose something, you'll see that at some point you will bite, it'll bite you. So I'm of the opinion that you should always do one thing and one thing well, right? So a very contained thing. And then that's what you should aim for, right? And then, because if you start to multi-purpose something, you see that one, it becomes complex, and second, it becomes unclear what to use when and for what, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I totally get that. So okay, so now this is clear, at least for me, that okay, this config is more NF specific configuration, like NF application specific configuration, and the other configure which exists, it's more deployment oriented configuration, right? Which we get from NF deployment and gets copied in a dependency, and then it can be considered.
They are both used for deployment, but the difference is that one is used for a remote, for a network function. So the reason we did it, by the way, and yeah, it was, maybe we could have done it a different way, right? So we could have done this a different way, but that's what we could do in the time window, right? So we pulled in the full config, right, from a remote site.
Yes.
From a remote network function, which basically, which is actually also the configuration of that network function. We could have done a far more granular approach, right?
Yeah.
That we say we only need, because at the end of the day, we only needed specific parameters, right? So you only need like the IP addresses of the remote site. That's basically what we needed. But then we said, okay, today we need this, tomorrow we need that. So we pulled in the whole thing, right? So that's basically what we did for now. But I think the clear distinction is that the reference, and I think you see it in the group definition. So one is basically config.ref.nephew.org, I think, and the other one will be now. So this is for me a discussion. The cellular at this stage, you can debate a little bit, right? Because what makes it cellular is actually the applicability towards the network function, right? So we could easily, given that this is a meta CR, right? So you could actually make this like config.nephew.org, right? And the other one config.ref.nephew.org. Because you could imagine this CR to be potentially multi-purpose. But I think, yeah.
I got that. I mean, but somewhere we should write that this is application-specific configuration. This is not deployment, right? This is
we should probably write it config.nf.nephew.org, I think, because that's probably way more applicable. Because
okay, config.nf.nephew.org. Okay, so we remove the notion of cellular.
Yes, I think it's better to do so, because then if we, let's say tomorrow we have a BNG, right? We don't need to define a new, I just put BNG, but you could do it for any other thing that has nothing to do with cellular. Let's say we have a Wi-Fi controller and we want to use it. We don't have to redefine the config CR, right? So that's the nice thing about it. So the only thing that we have to define is the snippets of the specific configuration that go with it. And yeah. And that's it.
Okay, so I'll just write on a config.nf.nephew.org.
Yeah, I think it's better to do it that way, given the latest things, than trying to put too much salary. Because see, a nice advantage of this, by the way, in my view, is, let's say at some point we adhere to, so we have basically a Yang-based network function, right? I don't know whether you do it. Do you have that, Sagar, in OAI?
Yang base, no. For the moment, let's say we configure the DU via using O1, which is Yang base. So okay, that.
But let's assume that at some point we have a network function that supports full Yang, right?
Yeah.
We can now do is basically just pass in that Yang configuration, and we don't have to define anything in Nephew.
Yes, and you don't even want to define this meta CRD, or you want to define via meta CRD? No.
Yeah, via the meta CRD. So this CRD remains as is, right?
Yes.
But then, so the Yang, so if you look at the snippets that we are adding in this config CRD,
yeah,
you have various snippets that go inside of this config NF CRD, right?
Yes. Okay. And I get that. I get your point. But again, in this particular thing, I also told you this earlier, Wim, that if you think about putting a Yang directly inside, and especially let's say Nokia or any other vendor, the Yang models are really big, and it's gonna cross 1 MB. How are you gonna do that?
But see, so okay. So what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to. So the nice thing is also that we can reference multiple, right? And you can do snippets of configuration. So you don't have to push in the whole Yang config. You can do a subset of it.
Okay, got it. Okay, understood. So understood.
And that's how you manage the size, right?
Okay. Okay. Do you have anything to say on this, Joseph? Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I was just thinking. So I think the difference is the other one is config.ref, and config.ref will be used only for importing other configurations of other NF. That is the main difference you are highlighting, right? But earlier, you remember that we discussed that we will use dependencies also to get the common NF configurations, right? So that in that scenario, is that scenario valid in this case, or how? So here, what you're suggesting is
I
that
think we
will
should
create.
we should always follow the same pattern, right? Everything that is, I see. Okay, we don't have the mechanism, yes, to inject this common configuration snippets into the package, but we will probably have it in release 3, right?
Okay.
Which
So
means
it's the
that
same model. Okay.
yeah, so which means that I think it's better to use. So the pattern that I think is probably easy to explain always is that config.ref is for configuration that comes from somewhere else, right? From other network functions that are needed here. Whereas config is coming from the current NF configuration. And we have, let's say, a missing component that we should need in Nephew, which is an ability to inject these common configs in all these packages dynamically, right? And we could use, so we could, yeah, so if we have that, so we could basically, what we could do is we could create an equivalent of the config reference function, which basically injects a common configuration, but my goal is not to do it because John is working on this binding reference, which is a much better way of addressing that problem than what we did in R1. You see?
Okay. Okay. So the whole concept would change.
No. The concept remains the same. All right. So,
okay.
So with what we are defining here, everything in specialization and stuff like that remains the same, right? So everything below remains the same. The piece that we are missing is a flexible way to inject common config into a package, right? That's the missing component. So what we can do in the current R2 timeframe is basically define that common config in all the packages, right? And we can do two things. Either create that common config in all the packages, or we can do what we did in R1 is like a poor man's implementation of doing so. Right?
Right. So I was thinking that we are following that approach, and so that's the reason I was thinking that we could reuse the config.ref because the only difference then would just be loop name, and the remaining contents remains the same except for the list, right? In this list of raw extensions are added, but the older one, it's only one raw extension. But I think in that case also I feel it can be extended to a list even for in case you want to import multiple dependencies, right, from different NF configurations. For example, right now we just have SMF depending on UPF, but SMF might, I'm just giving an example, might depend on AMF and UPF. In that case, again, it could become like a list. Like if you have a list of dependencies, then the config kind can have also a list of raw extensions with different kinds. So
yes, the only thing that you have to manage is the size, right? So
yeah, correct. So in that case, right, this CRD and the other CRD would look exactly the same. Only the group would be different. So do you really need to differentiate the two? That's my
view is yes, because one is not really your configuration. The other one is your configuration. That's what the difference is in the group.
Okay.
So that's why you have to, I distinguish the two in my view, because otherwise you don't need, you don't know what is what anymore, right?
Okay.
If you're the
with
receiver of this and you would have all the same, you don't know what is for you and what is not for you. So the group determines the origin or the purpose, if you will, right? So one is basically for this network function. The other one is actually configuration from another network function that you might want to leverage some parameters off. But it's not your config.
Okay.
And I think it's an important distinction to make.
Okay.
So, for example, it would be more like, let's say, SMF, let's say in FreeFireGC, like SMF needed, even the AMF needed the DNNs, let's say, or SMF needed the DNNs, which were also taken from the UPF, right? So there's some sort of, then this is more sort of a dependency, which we get when the UPF is running with the IP address of the UPF, which is configured in SMF. And then there will be the configuration of SMF itself, let's say PLMN and other parameters, right? Which it will consume using this group.
Correct, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, okay. So in that case, should I just, okay, if we agree with this, I change the group to nf.nephew.org and kind to config.nf.nephew.org.
Kind should be config.
Yeah, yeah.
In uppercase.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'll do that. I added the command and then, okay. So for R2,
let me do one check on the API server, because I think at some point Tal changed the name to workload or something like that. And
where?
So, yeah, wait a minute. I'm going to the API reference. Wait a minute. Where is this again?
So for the individual kinds, you'll still keep cellular, right? Or you'll
yeah, the individual ones, in my view, that would still be a cellular. Yeah, it would be PLMN cellular dot config.org or something like that. It would be like that. Yeah.
So it's PLMNs cellular config.org. The name.
Yes. So where did we do workload? Here in NF deployment, we did workloads. I still don't know. Was not so happy with that change. Because we are talking about network functions, right? And so in NF deployment, it's actually called workload.nephew.org. Did we call it? What did we call it? Config.network function nephew.org, right? In this case, it would be
last one.
It would be config.workload.nephew.org.
Okay.
But I'm of the opinion we should call it network function. But I remember.
Okay, actually that's true. Yeah, because right now you're saying nf deployments.workload.nephew.org, then I have to do more like nfconfig.workload.nephew.org. Because I think he's calling workload because he does not want to make nf specific. He wants to mention any workload, right? So
yeah, but then we call it. We should have called it an app, right? Because everything is.
Yeah, that's another debate. Then
correct. So let's not. So we need to move forward here.
Okay, so then I call this nfconfig. Let's say.
So today we call it nf deployment. Yeah. .workload. Yeah. So probably we should call it nfconfig.workload.nef. Then we are consistent, right?
Exactly, that's what it is. And it's very,
nfconfig.workload. Okay, the kind is nfconfig.
Yeah.
The kind is nfconfig, and then then we should move it under if we use so under so it's today the API called nf_deployment/v1 alpha. In this case, we should
I mean, actually, yeah, this is another thing, because the folder here is known as NF deployments. Yeah. And
No,
the
but
group
we could refactor this as workload, because then everything of workload goes there, right?
absolutely. So I would do that actually. I'll call it workloads, that's it. And workloads, then I will call it here workloads, v1 alpha, and then I'll have here nf_config. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay.
let's see what else we are.
Okay. It's really funny, in the beginning when I proposed this PR, it was nf_config.
Is it?
Yeah.
No, but
It
the
was.
problem, I think we have a problem in our structure a little bit.
It's
No,
okay.
I think
So
it's still cellular is still there, right? Because no, yes, right? Because
yeah,
for this
cellular is only there for the individual snippets, right?
individual one, so that is a change.
That,
Yeah.
that we can, but what we should do is basically, so we rename NF deployments to workloads, right?
yeah.
V1 alpha, and then in there we put NF config in that folder, right? And then I would put
Yeah.
everything with cellular V1 alpha, all the snippets, I would put them together.
Yeah, like this, I have this folder known as cellular_configs v1 alpha, and here there are all the snippets PLMN, served Gumi. There will be the same, and then there'll be the other one of Joseph for the RAN.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure whether we can split that up also in a contained thing, Joseph, the RAM.
Yeah, just this very few parameters. I'm not the individual ones. Then it would be in. I'm not sure it would be too much. So if you split it into individual parameters, right? I don't know if for every parameter you want to do, or
Because
we need to group it some logical grouping. We might
because
have
some
to
of the parameters we can always also get via labels or annotations, right?
Right, but do you want to create a kind for every parameter?
See, the
Or
problem that you
if
have
we-
is, the problem that we have is every time if you do a run, right? And that was my whole debate on why we split it to PLMN and serve Gumi, right? Is that every time you have to change, you have to bump the version of the CR, D, and the CR.
you are you talking about this version?
no,
Oh, the version of the V1 alpha 1.
V1
And the V1 alpha. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
V1 3. So it's a huge tax that you pay.
Yeah. Okay.
but then it might change, right? So for example, PLMN, if it changes in the future, I think you still have to.
Yeah, correct. But I think so I think we try to design it to accommodate for most of the changes right now. See, so this is what the advantage of a Yang-based system, right? If you take a Yang-based system, we don't have to do anything on here. The problem that we have is
these kinds will not be there. So we use directly the Yang.
Yes, yeah, correct. So, and that's where we
so,
should.
So this is used with, yeah, okay. So then this is temporary till the Yang based models are used, right?
Useful, and whether we can use them, right? So, but we should also try to avoid, if we define those APIs, that we don't have to redo it all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem which I have with when you do a big one. If you do a big one, you're sure that you're going to change.
Okay, but the Yang-based model kind of approach is also limited to the vendor, right? The vendor has to implement, the vendor has to do it. If the vendor does not support, then okay. But if we talk about only, let's say, for the open source at the moment, let's say none of the open source network functions which are out there, especially for cellular, they don't support Yang.
Oh, correct. So at the moment, we don't have that. But what I'm trying to say is that 3GPP defines those models, right?
Yes. That's
either we adhere to those things, right? And we mediate at a certain level towards the implementation of the vendor. But what I'm trying to get to is defining those CRs is a pain, right? We don't want to be in the business of defining them.
I totally agree. I totally agree. That's perfectly fine. That's why we did something very basic till the time, because of course extending it every time it's going to be hard. And if we do it per NF, then it's also hard because there are so many parameters. Even in the thing is, even in the 3GPP defined specification SFI working group, there are a lot of them which are mandatory, and then there are a lot of them which are not mandatory. And there are only a couple of them which are mandatory, and half of them they are not mandatory. So, but every vendor implements by itself. They have different information elements. They need different ones. So, of course, it's going to be a pain. So that's why I was saying that because at a point of time you said that if we do it like this in R3, you will change everything. So does it make any sense if we do this right now and in R3 it gets changed?
Or is it okay to keep Alpha 1 till it stabilizes?
But it's never going to stabilize, Joseph. I mean, just be honest. You're going to change every time.
Yeah,
the other thing what we can do with those things is we can move them to experimental or something like that, right?
The APIs, right?
Yeah, so those snippets, right? So move them to experimental, and then but see, the changes that we have to do is a lot, right? So we have to change the packages, we have to change the implementations, so there is a lot of there's a lot of baggage, right?
Yeah, I should change.
Yeah, I mean, this we also discussed before, that there will be baggage, of course. Nothing comes without a baggage, so that it will be there. So that's the thing. So if we do it now, then we do it again in R3. So does it make sense to continue with this approach or not? Because if it does not make sense in continuing with this approach of having, segregated small CRs, let's say, and if we later gonna move to, let's say, young base models, then probably we should not do it, and we just, focus on other things in R2 and try to make R2 work.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying is that what you could do is basically put stuff in like an experimental thing, right? And just pass them through, right? And that nobody acts upon it except for the element at the end. The disadvantage with that is that if you want to do some commonalities between FreeFireGC and OAI, you have to have specific implementation. So that means that, for example, a PLMN ID, if you want to share it between FreeFireGC and OAI, you have to do, there needs to be some logic that takes care of that.
Yeah, that's true, but I don't think so there is any sort of a use case right now. I see the only reason of having it this way was, from the beginning when you were doing only DNN, I just said that only DNN, doing DNN is not enough, because mapping DNN to its PLMN and SSTSD, it's a pain. So half of the parameters were really constant in the configuration. So the only reason of me proposing this was making the configuration a little bit dynamic, having only the most important configuration parameters dynamic and rest okay. So I mean, for R2, me personally, I have no problem making it things static, I can perfectly reuse whatever is there. If this PR is not there, frankly, this configuration one, it's not big of a deal. It's still okay. It's gonna work. Things will be fine. Then in R3, we can sit and have a better configuration mechanism if we don't want to go through this way. So I have really no problem. Even for me, like, this approach is also pretty much fun. It's just, for me, I feel it is more sort of an extension to it's an extension to our extension of let's say R1 DNN, because there was only DNN, let's say. And if it's not there, then I'll just go back. Me personally, I'll go back to the previous one and I'll do it like that way. But then the configuration sharing between the RAN and the core, that will be the pain, because then the RAN and the core, exactly. So me and Joseph, we have to assume that we are using the same PLMN, right? So his operator will use PLMN, I don't know, 01,
Yeah,
001,
or I mean,
the test.
that I think we already have way, right? We discussed initially, right? Using dependencies. I think creating a config package and sharing it across. I mean, that we can do still, I think, right?
But you still have to agree on the same parameters, right?
Yeah. You'll have to agree on the same parameters.
That's what this basically does. That's why, see, I'm of the opinion, my proposal would be the following, right? Is like the config, I think is useful, so that we will not throw away, in my view. But these snippets like PLMN, we should put them in experimental, right? At least we have a common base for now.
Okay.
My personal view is the following, right? Is that we should adhere to 3GPP models and have a mediator. So that means that at the top, you basically get 3GPP inside, right? Which you would add to the config snippets, right? To the config NF. And what we can do is, even if the network function does not implement a full netconf, a full Yang stack, you don't even need netconf. We build a mediator that takes in 3GPP and can render it towards its specific implementation, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
You mean create the packages based on that?
So in other words, so we only use 3GPP models, right? From an orchestration point of view, okay? And so the problem that we have right now is that, okay, it's probably a little bit too late to do so, but let's assume that we do so. So what you need, we probably don't, so the free or the open source network functions do not have a Yang netconf, Yang or GNMI implementation. But what we could do is build a netconf, build a Yang parser that basically can take the input of that schema that you send down. You send it as a CR, right? So it basically parses the CR and gets a Yang representation out of it. And then we need to build a mediator that puts that to the necessary config that the network function eventually consumes.
Okay,
I'm
it's
feeling
like
that is a better approach in the future, because then the only thing that we have to care about is 3GP Yang, and we don't have to care about modeling and all that shit, right? But you see, but of course the network function, so we would have to build a mediator on the free 5GC and on the OAI that takes in 3GP and models it towards their own specific config.
I get that. I get that. I mean, for OAI, we have our configuration parameters are more aligned in terms of SA5, so that is fine. That's not big of a deal. And even the other ones also, it's not going to be that big, to make a translator for them. I've seen that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's for me, that's fine. Then it's more gonna be for R3, So for I would say, if we just, let's say if we talk about right now for R2, then okay, then I remove this, then I remove cellular completely. That's what then I think that we remove cellular completely, move it to
experimental for now, right? And then you just render it through them.
Yeah, we put it on experimental, or me and Joseph, we just agree on the list of parameters which gonna be there, and yeah, and that's it. Or yeah, we do it in experimental. We can think about it, and then I leave the nf config dot workload dot nephew.org.
Yeah, leave that there.
And,
right? So keep that there.
Yeah, and the rest I delete and I move it to other ones. Yeah.
Because the advantage is, at least we have a common schema, right? So that's the advantage that you have by having the schema, but I don't think we should put it into the core of the library. It's just put it to experimental, because maybe we should discuss this in the wider team, is what I was suggesting, is to use Yang as an orchestration layer, right? At the top layer. And then we mediate at the lowest level.
Yeah, I think we should discuss that approach.
Yeah, I mean, we should discuss that with a bigger team, but
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of opinions about having Yang being, cloud native and a lot of other points. I think you already had this discussion in the past, I think. That's gonna come back.
Yeah, but Yang is cloud native, right? It's actually more extensive than CRDs, by the way. You have way more validation rules in it. But so
Okay, I mean,
the top
okay.
doesn't see Yang, is what I'm saying, right? So they don't have to see it.
Okay. We just also have to figure out how we're gonna use directly 3GPP as a configuration Yang models. If of course they're gonna reside in 3GPP repository, so we have to see that with the wider group then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then.
That also, I think we should look at the use of 3GPP, all that licensing part also needs to be clarified, I think. So yeah, I think that's a discussion. I think that we should start this as well, I think, in WG2, because I think they are also looking at how to do O1. I think this is in line with that. So yeah, this is we should do a study topic and also POC around this, I think. And then in R3 we can have some basic implementation of that. That's what I think we should propose.
Yeah, we can have a look. Yeah, sure. Yeah. But let's do it like we discussed right now. Keep NF config, and then we move the other to experimental, and then
Sure.
we'll take
So
it from
in the pages, so we'll have hard-coded, not hard-coded, manually created config, which is nf nfconfig.nfio.org, right? One CR for that, which embeds all the individual kinds that we
it's the experimental pieces.
Experimental repo, which will be in the experimental. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think then yeah, we can do that.
All right. Okay, so from this week onwards, I will be more reachable.
Yeah, sure.
It's perfectly fine. Even I am on vacation, so I was doing on and off.
Yeah, but I was on the road. It was like I have meeting after meeting after meeting. I had even no time to do anything properly. So
it's perfectly fine. Now we have clarity. I think now most of the things will be done quickly. Thanks.
all right.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.